morning and welcome to the launch of a Menzies Research Centre report highlighting an issue of critical importance to children and parents. My name's Nick Cater. I'm the Executive Director of the Menzies Research Centre, which is an organisation dedicated to finding practical and principled solutions to public policy problems. Our report, Empowering Australian Parents to Keep Their Children Safe Online, points to the dangers our children are exposed to from smartphone technology. The disappearance of 4-year-old Cleo Smith from a camping ground in WA recently evoked the most potent of parental nightmares, the snatching of one's child by a stranger. However, contrary to popular imaginings, children left alone outdoors have seldom been safer, thanks to technology including video surveillance and mobile phones. It was a mobile phone tower that provided the data that police needed to find Cleo and her alleged abductor. Paradoxically, though, the most dangerous place for children today can be sitting alone in their room. More than 90% of Australian teenagers and 2/3 of primary school children have their own smart devices, enabling them to be more or less permanently online. The screen time can be harmful to kids is not in dispute. What we don't yet know is how badly or how permanently our kids are damaged from things like the absence of physical activity, exposure to cyberbullying, early introduction to pornography and other inappropriate content, or contact with strangers. Our report finds that parents are denied access to tools that would allow them to monitor their children's progress or their children's behaviour online, tools that allow endpoint security to be activated on mobile devices, device management systems that enable them to be controlled remotely, are freely available to business customers, but not to developers of parental control apps. Our report found that Apple's desire to protect its proprietary software has stifled competition. In 2018, Apple systematically removed 11 leading third-party parental control apps from its platform. Restrictions coincided with the launches of Apple's own control software, Screen Time. But attempts by independent software developers to develop apps using the capability of Screen Time have been frustrated by compliance issues. Effectively, parents have to rely on Apple and Google to babysit their kids, and as the ACCC reported in March, they're not doing it very well. The application of age-appropriate restrictions on apps is extremely alarming. The ACCC found 176 casino apps on the Apple Store rated appropriate for children 4 years and above. The Google Play Store was found to have dating and chat apps marketed at children and teenagers. Our report finds that the competition framework, which is used to regulate these matters, is not up to the task. It needs rebooting for the digital age. The Morrison government led the world in challenging the social media giants to protect the copyright of news. Another fight with big tech seems inevitable if we're to protect the sanctity of childhood. In a moment, I'll be joined from West Australia by Celia Hammond MP, who will formally launch our report. And I'm looking forward later too to contributions from two other people with expertise in this field. Tim Levy is the CEO of Family Zone, a software development company that specialises in protecting children's online safety. And Jordan Foster is a clinical psychologist and a leading cyber safety expert. But first, let me introduce Celia Hammond, the federal member for Curtin and a former Vice-Chancellor of the University of Notre Dame, Australia. Celia has practiced in and lectured in law and has first-hand experience of the challenge we're highlighting today as a parent. Celia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here today to launch the latest MRC report. As you point out, I don't actually have expertise such as either Tim or Jordan, but I do actually have experience both as a parent, as somebody who's not a digital native, who had children at a time when technology was taking off, who has, remembers what before emails, before smartphones, before computers, and have seen the rapid transition of that. And I think a starting point for this conversation, and I think it's implicit within the MRC's report, is that tech advances and the creation of the online environment have been remarkable throughout, quite a short time period. And there are so many positives. Information, learning and education, the connection and communication, which we've seen during the time of COVID. The fact that you're somewhere on the East Coast, Nick, don't know if you'll ever be allowed back into Perth. I'm here in quarantine in WA, and we've got people dotted all around the country. Obviously, this is happening because of technology. And then there's, of course, the entertainment value of technology. And so I don't think any of us tech has transformed the way that we live, the way we work and the way we play. But there are also challenges, and I think that you've highlighted a lot of them just in your introduction there. And those challenges, as you've highlighted in your introduction, but I think are also outlined further in the report, impacts on our physical health, our mental health. There's also societal impact of any number of things. There's misinformation, there's abuse, there's bullying, all these things online. And it's no wonder that governments and research bodies and NGOs across the world are starting to, give considerable amount of attention to the challenges that technology and the online environment have created. As I say, it's a question for all of us about balancing those positives with the challenges and the downsides and the potential threats that are imposed by this new environment. Now, as you point out, Nick, the Australian government has taken a number of steps in recent years and has been a world leader in some respects. In 2015, it created the Office of the eSafety Commissioner, and just this year it's passed a new law, the Online Safety Act, which will come into effect early next year. And both of these are excellent, as are all of the other steps. But one thing that this Menzies Research Centre report really highlights is that still more work needs to be done when it comes to protecting children online. And particularly, more needs to be done to ensure that parents are properly empowered to put in place the protections that they deem to be appropriate for their children at the various ages and stages of their lives. As you noted at the outset, and as made very clear in this Menzies Research Centre report, there are two companies, Apple and Google, who control the dominant mobile operating systems and the mobile app marketplaces. And this report, drawing, on international work, on international litigation and on international searches and inquiries, highlights how this concentration of power has led to a situation where Apple and Google effectively have more control and power over what children can and cannot do online than children's parents do. Further, and I think this is even more concerning, and it comes to that issue of competition policy and concentration, the report identifies a number of market practices which Apple and Google utilise to further entrench their position and further limit the choice and options available to parents in the parental control market app place. Now, there are three main things I think that I pick out of this report that are in some ways really, that they were really quite a shock. Although some of it you kind of instinctively know, but it's still quite a shock. The first is that Apple and Google have essentially made 13 the age of consent for usage in the online environment, for the effective age of consent for use of their devices. I actually remember when my eldest son, it's quite considerable time ago now, but was about to turn 13, and he came into me and he said, I can't wait to turn 13. It means I'm allowed to have an Instagram account. And I went, what do you mean you're allowed to have an Instagram account? That's actually determined by your parents, not you. But he told me, and at the time I just, passed it off as another one of these teenage comments that, apparently you're allowed to go to pubs at 15 now too, which I didn't believe. But the 13 is actually the age under both Google and Apple have set that people can unclick or disable parental controls. Now, I actually know that a lot of parents aren't aware of that. They aren't aware that these devices that have been set up effectively allow kids, and they are still kids at the age of 13, to disable parental controls on their apps and on their devices. And let's not we're not talking about a situation where only a few people have these devices. I mean, the recent statistics, which I think are also pointed out in the Menzies Research Centre report, 90% of high school kids have access to smart devices, and about 2/3 of primary school kids, and it's actually being required in schools for their learning. So they're having it not as an indulgence, it's actually now an educational tool, but it's an educational tool that can be used in different ways, far beyond what the schools are imagining. Another key thing, which is actually quite alarming and really concerning, that Menzies Research Centre report highlights, is the two-tier system and the absolute nonsense, I would put it as, that enterprises have a lot more control. So a business enterprise has a lot more control over what it can allow its employees and the users of its devices to access than parents can over what they allow their children to access. So enterprises, who obviously spend a lot of money and they're valuable customers of the tech companies, can work with the tech companies and get app developers and to actually put in place control limits on what people can access, content filters, and all sorts of, they can have these built into their enterprise systems. And Apple and Google work with them, and Microsoft, they work with app developers to do that for enterprises, because they know that these enterprises bring them big bucks and they set up the system to support them so they keep using their devices. And I think that this is a point that Tim from Family Zone can better illustrate when he actually chats with us, that they don't allow app developers that same access in terms of parental control apps. And that is actually really, as I said, it's a nonsense that enterprises can control it for employees, but parents can't control it, get access to the same information to be able to control it for their children. Finally, the other thing that's really highlighted in this report is the anti-competitive behaviour of big tech, and the tactics and the market forces that they use to make their apps, which are commonly referred to as first-party apps, so apps which they develop or they endorse, to make them more functional and more available to people to access. So such things as ranking them higher in the Apple or Google, the Play Store. It's making sure that they have access to what they do. First-party apps have greater access to the functionality of the operating systems, and so they can actually make their apps work better, work faster. So there's all these sort of market games going on which actually undermine the competitiveness of third-party app developers, meaning that they don't actually have an equal playing room. And I think this is the big point that the Menzies Research Centre report does. And I really commend you on writing this report, because it highlights the issue at both a general level, but also at a very specific level, which actually impacts on all of us and which we should all be concerned about. So it's bringing the general issue into the specific, and if you like, into the home. So the general issue is the complete concentration of power and the lack of competition, which is an issue that must be addressed, because we all know that competition actually leads to better outcomes in terms of choice, in terms of development, and there's also the dangers that go with too much market concentration and control. So there's that at a general level, but in the parental control app marketplace, the Menzies Research Centre reports how it's actually parents, it's families, and ultimately kids. We all know, we were all kids once, and we all know that as a kid you like to test boundaries, and you will always try and test what your parents, the rules that, well, not all of us do, but a lot of us do try to test the bounds that parents put down. That's good and well, that's part of learning and developing and growing up. But when parents set down boundaries, they also want to know that they are able to rely on those boundaries that they put in place, and they have that right and that responsibility to actually raise their children and to help them grow up in an environment which is positive and which is going to lead to their thriving. And in the case of this particular issue, in the app development, in access to the online environment, parents are being underdone. Apple and Google and the nature of the environment that is there at the moment, the competitive environment, the regulatory environment, means that parents are missing out on getting access to better tools and better monitoring systems because of that environment. I think that the Menzies Research Centre report really identifies that and makes a really compelling point, really compelling argument in favour of government taking more steps to look at the concentration of power, to look at the competition issues, and ultimately to empower parents and empower people to have more choice and have more say about how they're raising their children in this all new online environment. So, Nick, to you and the Menzies Research Centre, I commend you on this report. I believe it's a really, really strong addition to the current work that's been going on globally, looking at the tech giants. I think it's fantastic that you're able to, as I say, bring it into the home, personalise it by looking at it in this particular scenario of the parental control apps. And I think it's something that everybody, every parent, every grandparent, everybody should look at, read, and really think about deeply about what we need to do to make sure that this environment for our children is the best environment that we can create for them. So I commend you on the report, and I'm very happy to launch it.
Thank you, Celia, for that introduction to the report, which you can download, incidentally, from our website, www.menziesrc.org, or you can just simply look for us on Google. A few acknowledgements before we go on. On the call today, board members of the Menzies Research Centre, Mitch Hook and Christy McSweeney, and I also acknowledge Robin Nolan and Catherine Greiner. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for all of you for joining us on this call. Now let me welcome Tim Levy. Tim Levy is a successful telecommunications and technology entrepreneur. He's the founder of Vodafone's largest retail partner, Mo's Mobiles, and was the former CEO of listed Optus reseller B Digital Limited. He's currently the CEO of software developer Family Zone. Tim, welcome to the launch.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Celia. That was fantastic introductions to this great piece of work. I guess if I could start, I think most of the community, to be honest, are quite distracted by the convenience and the entertainment offered by the technology that's made available to them to really notice the power shift. Right, we've transferred so much power to big tech, Google, Apple, and Microsoft in particular, which is the subject of this conversation. We've transferred so much power to them without knowing. But what's fantastic about this report from Menzies Research Centre, and it follows recent great work from the ACCC's Digital Platforms Inquiry, is it's calling out the anti-competitive behaviour of big tech, and unfortunately, a lot of that behaviour is around what they describe as engagements, mechanisms to engage, what parents would describe as addict end users. Things that have been identified in this Menzies report, like Apple pulling all the parental control apps from the App Store unilaterally when they decided to build their own first-party apps, as Celia described them. It's just outrageous. But that's just one of many great examples that have been identified in that report and identified in the Digital Platforms Inquiry report, and also in a whole series of inquiries globally, in the US, in Russia, in South Korea, and beyond. Everyone seems to now finally be paying attention to the fact that there is no safeguards in the way of big tech from influencing behaviour. And what concerns me most, and concerns our organisation mostly, is about the plight of parents in this digital world. And a bit about me before I go on, just so people understand why I feel this is important. I've been working in parental controls with the Family Zone team here since 2013. We're now, I think, the third biggest parental control or online safety provider globally. We support about 20,000 schools and 10 million students on our platform every day. So, this little company out of Perth is now one of the leading voices in this space globally. And what we do, because of our privileged position of supporting enterprises, as Celia mentioned, and parents, is we see the gap. We are literally day in, day out see that gap, that the things that businesses can do, enterprises can do to monitor behaviour of adults, to control what adults do, parents would love to have access to that. It is incredibly frustrating. So many people in the policy landscape and in homes in the community think, well, it's just too big a problem. It can't be fixed. But I can tell you absolutely, the technology to achieve meaningful, in fact, fundamental change in cyber safety exists today. It exists today. I'll give some simple examples. Parents can't control access to iMessage, but businesses can. Parents can't control their kids from accessing explicit material on iPhones through the App Store, iTunes and so on, but businesses can. Businesses can have complete visibility of the internet activity of their users. Parents cannot. Apple doesn't allow that. As Celia mentioned, as of 13, kids can remove parental control apps from their Google and Apple devices. Adults using devices owned by businesses cannot. It just makes no sense that businesses can have the ability to monitor and control adult behaviour that is not offered to parents. So that, again, that's my biggest concern. I feel it's perverse. I feel much like anti-competitive regulation globally has made big impacts in areas like railways and telecommunications. I think there is an opportunity now, given the kind of groundswell of interest, to do something similar. All this report is really asking for, and the digital platforms report inquiry was asking for, is open access, is interoperability. The things like mobile number portability, which has worked fabulously in telecommunications, data portability, which is now a subject of GDPR legislation, aligning gauges in railways, which has created competition in rail lines globally. That's all that's really required for businesses like mine and others in this industry whose entire purpose is about protecting kids and supporting parents to do so. We need open access so that Google and Apple and Microsoft are preferencing their technologies or preferencing businesses over the rights and obligations of parents. So that's really the message I want to give, is this is possible. It's not an esoteric conversation about competition, overcharging and so on. It is technology that exists now, and the reason it's not being put in the hands of parents is this deliberate choices of Google and Apple in particular, but Microsoft as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for that practical and very helpful explanation of some of the problems you face, and really the importance of getting parents front and centre of the monitoring process. And now to Jordan Foster. Jordan is one of Australia's foremost cybersecurity experts. She was awarded several prestigious awards, including the 2020 Telstra Business Women's Award Emerging Leader category, for her work in international cyber safety through her international cyber safety consultancy ySafe. She's a clinical psychologist and is the founder and CEO of ySafe, now a nationally adopted household name in the field of cybersecurity. Jordan has extensive clinical expertise working with children and adolescents managing problematic technology use, including cyberbullying, image-based abuse and compulsive gaming. Jordan, thank you for joining us this morning, and over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining today. This topic is, for me personally, incredibly important, and it's really heartening to see so many people wanting to hear more about this topic and obviously read and contribute to the Menzies research report. I wanted to provide some context. There's been some really amazing, not in a positive way, things that have been highlighted here in terms of the outcome of the report and Tim's comment and Celia's comment. But I wanted to contextualise what this actually means for a parent. I think about an interview recently with Sue Ellery, the Minister of Education here in WA, and she was commenting on the steps that schools are taking to talk about cyber safety, and schools are making great strides in this area. But one of her comments was that parents need to be doing more to assist schools and kids in the cyber safety journey. And I think that sentence alone is problematic for many parents because of how disempowered they are. One of the things that I hear commonly across the country is people saying to parents in particular that you just shouldn't give your child access to a device and all of these issues disappear. And that, again, is setting all parents and children up for failure. To give you an idea about what a parent's experience with technology is with their child, a lot of parents in Australia in particular are having to make choices about their kids' technology use before they're particularly ready. And this is largely attributed to the fact that in school, many kids are asked to access technology on a BYOD program or a one-to-one program. And it usually starts in year 3. So we're talking about 7-year-olds who are being told by the school to have access to a device. Now, many parents will report that they do not want to give access to their kids access to technology at that age, but they literally have no choice. Then as kids get older, a lot of parents are often told, just put the device away at night time, go and charge it in a communal space. But the challenge with that is that developmentally, as Celia did mention, a lot of kids will test boundaries. As a psychologist, we know that that's to be true, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a very normal developmental stage that kids go through, despite the fact that it's very frustrating for parents. But what they will do then is find a way to access that device and access that technology. So it's another strategy that's suggested to parents that is absolutely set up to fail. What strikes me about Apple and Google in particular is the fact that they give more power to enterprise customers than they do to parents in helping keep their kids safe online. And when I have conversations with parents about this, they are absolutely outraged. And they don't necessarily know that that's the case until they start talking about it. It's very clearly mentioned in the T's and C's on Apple and Google's websites, but parents don't know. And so then they're faced with these issues that kids have more power to decide what they want to do online, and parents have to essentially ask permission. Can you please get roped into my safety settings that I'm trying to implement for you? And you can imagine a teenager is absolutely going to say, no, thank you. Or what can you do for me that's going to incentivize me to do that? Parents are absolutely behind the 8 ball. The thing about cyber safety is then if I think about kids and how this is impacting kids, we can see in the research report, there's a lot of information about screen time, wellbeing, cyberbullying. But I want to share with you a few anecdotes essentially about why this is really important. That's not just statistics. But there's a really interesting research report that came out of Murdoch University last year. And what it found was a direct relationship between phone use at nighttime with teenagers and well-being. So their ability to emotionally regulate, their ability to contribute in schooling and academic outcomes, there was a direct relationship that was attributed to the lack of sleep. Now, if you cannot, as a parent, regulate your child's device properly and adequately, then you're going to be faced with this type of issue. The old put the phone away in a different room doesn't work because teenagers will find a way to access that device. It's largely as well due to the fact that so many social media platforms in particular are finding ways to try and engage young people. So things like read receipts on messages create this sense of social responsibility that they have to reply to kids and things like that. There's a lot of these features that are built in that drive kids' usage and engagement with technology on these platforms. So there's the element of that we can see there's a direct relationship on well-being. But if we think about new technologies that are emerging at the moment, there is problematic things coming up for young people that is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think about things like AI and deep fakes. At the moment, deep fakes are something that a lot of people haven't necessarily heard of. But there are a lot of apps now that are very increasing in popularity. Wombo is one of them, that you can essentially superimpose a face onto a body or whatever the case is. It could be of an animal or a person. I saw in a school about a year ago a situation where a 14-year-old girl had an Instagram account created about her, and all of the photos and the videos on this Instagram account were pornographic in nature. And so the school contacted us and the police got involved because there's a very problematic and illegal aspect to what was happening there. But it turns out that someone had a vendetta against this particular poor child who didn't actually have social media herself and had taken steps to superimpose her face onto these pornographic videos and photos. Now, this content is illegal, but also contributes now to her digital footprint. So if you looked her up, you saw this content, and it wasn't even her who made them, and she wasn't even in it. She didn't have social media herself. These types of behaviours are becoming increasingly common. And we need to make sure that parents are empowered to know how to deal with this situation, but also know how to manage their child's technology use. The thing about cyber safety in particular is that what we know is that all kids benefit from one parent practicing cyber safety behaviours. So particularly in a school community, one parent taking steps to protect their child or to educate their child has flow-on effects, because that particular child is educated and then participates in the online world in a safer way, which then impacts how they're engaging with other students and children. But we also know that parents who are taking steps actually has some sort of a contagion effect where other parents start to act as well. Unfortunately, it works in the opposite way. If you have proactive parents who are trying to take steps by implementing settings or setting up parental controls, and they are faced with issues, these are the proactive parents that take the time to actually do something about it, and they fail. It is more likely then within a school community that most parents will do nothing because they can look to the proactive parent and can notice that their attempts were feeble. We need to make sure that all parents are upskilled and empowered, which has this really broad impact on the community. It's the point to reflect on, I think, to finish up, is that this is a fundamental part of every young person's life now, the access to technology, to social media platforms. And we need to make sure that we are upskilling parents at all times with helping their child navigate through that in a safe type of way. If we continue to have this environment where Apple and Google can make decisions about the safety of kids, irrespective of what parents think, we have a really significant issue. So I think that this particular research report and what we're trying to achieve here is incredibly important, not only for parents now, but for parents in generations to come.
Thank you, Jordan, for that expertise. Now to some questions. We've got about 10 minutes left on the call, a little over 10 minutes. We have a question from Wendy Francis. She says, protecting the age of innocence is a February 2020 federal government report outlining the need for Australia to introduce age verification legislation in order to protect children online from predators who use pornography websites to prey upon them. The report made the case for online age verification very clear. Just a quote from the report: the committee concluded that age verification can create a significant barrier to prevent young people, and particularly young people, from exposure to online content. Well, the report is 2 years old and the recommendations have not been acted upon. What has been advanced however, is a digital identity system that will require social media platforms to obtain parental consent from users under 16 for the best interests of children. All well and good steps, all well and good, says Wendy, but it stops short of addressing the establishment of age verification on adult websites. If we can verify the age on social media, why can't we implement age verification for pornography? I might go to Tim on that. You might know some of the technical aspects of that, Tim, and then perhaps to Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, age verification is, it's an obvious and important initiative. The problem is the internet doesn't work that way. People think about age verification like, wrapped pornography magazines at a service station, that the attendant there can make sure that they check ID before the person buys them. That's not how the internet works. We find in our system, for instance, we're embedded in schools, and we see that 60% of high school kids have technology called a VPN. A VPN bypasses any age verification method because you can pop your internet service out in the US or in any other jurisdiction that doesn't mandate age verification. Age verification can very easily be, with today's technology, in most instances, be avoided just by kids creating their own account or borrowing a credit card. In fact, kids can get credit cards at under 13 now. So the actual methods to employ age verification are super problematic, easy to get around. And yes, there is a cohort of kids that aren't mischievous, and that will probably be, their activities will probably be that their ability to access inappropriate content can probably be stopped by age verification. But that's not the problem, right? The problem is there are a lot of kids who have the time and the technical ability to work their way around those things, and they do, and they show other kids how to do it. And that's what's normalizing the challenges of online safety. Online safety, let's be real, is a cat and mouse game. And to think that we can, which so much of the conversation on online safety is, let's just get Facebook to be reasonable, to think that that's going to solve this problem is actually sadly fanciful, because the challenges of online safety they metastasize. They're like a virus that just gets distributed through your body. A great example, TikTok. No one would have heard of TikTok 4 or 5 years ago. It's now one of the biggest social media platforms in the world. I think it's in the top 3 or 4. That happens. And so, yes, you might have a more responsible, let's hope, Facebook someday, but then who's going to be, making sure that the next suite of online safety, social media or gaming platforms are similarly safe? And ultimately, sorry to kind of conclude this conversation, ultimately, the best method of ensuring there is age verification, that there is age-appropriate access to things online, is really what we're talking about. It's Google and Apple and Microsoft playing ball and allowing the parent to configure that device with technology that is age-aware. That way, then that user cannot install a VPN. They cannot, they can be directed to age-appropriate versions of these platforms. So I think, long story short, I think age verification is a very worthwhile objective, but it's not a silver bullet. It's very problematic, and ultimately, everything that came out in this Menzies research report is fundamental. Unless parents have the ability to enforce, to limit what platforms, for instance, those platforms that support those sorts of tools, unless parents have the ability to do that, age verification will fail.
Jordan, to your perspective on this, would you agree that in the end, the most effective barrier to children accessing inappropriate content is the ability of a parent to monitor that internet use and control access to VPNs and other things that would enable them to circumvent that the normal procedures?
Yeah, absolutely. In order to really achieve cyber safety for kids, age verification is a component of that. But my concern is that we tend to overinflate how effective something like that would be, and then we don't do anything else. We don't try and consider the fact that, as Tim mentioned, that VPNs are very commonly used by young people, not necessarily even for the purpose of being sort of devious and trying to get around things that their parents have put in place. They're used to access American TV shows on streaming platforms as well. They're just really common things that young people are accessing. And I think that we tend to have this perspective that, but kids wouldn't do that. It's too technical. It's too hard to access. I don't even know what that means, and therefore kids mustn't be using it. But these types of things are apps that kids can download. It makes me think of when Donald Trump was threatening to block access to TikTok in the US. And there was a big conversation that was happening online between young people about how they would circumvent TikTok being blocked. And the easiest way would be to download a VPN and to access TikTok in other ways. These conversations flow through online communities and apps in the school playground. How do we actually get around these types of restrictions that are put in place? So unless a parent has the ability to block access to these tools, these apps that help circumvent age verification, then we're not going to achieve that successfully at all. It really does come back down to what tools are we providing parents in order to minimize kids' access to platforms in of themselves, not just requiring age verification, which is not a silver bullet.
Just time for one more question, I think, one from Lyle Shelton, who says, what technical limitations are there to providing a default filter of pornography and other inappropriate material as a way of protecting children? I might broaden that and go to you, Celia. So just to speak to this issue, as we've discussed, that there are some technical solutions. We've already discussed age verification technology. But in the end, your experience is both as a parent, but also as a legislator, do you see empowering parents as the most effective way to deal with this problem?
I think that it's the missing piece. I think there's so much legislation that we can do. I think the creation, the eSafety Commissioner is absolutely fantastic, doing absolutely brilliant work and educating people and following up on things, and we're giving more power to the eSafety Commissioner. But that is to really, that addresses things after they've happened. I think a key thing here, and it's shown in the Menzies Research Centre report, it comes out very, very clearly, is that it is about empowering parents. We need to have that as part of the mix. There's so much legislation that we can do. And you know, I, for one, always hesitate before we pass more legislation. I think less is often more, that we don't want to be over legislated. But it is firmly about putting power back in the hands of parents, because it's also parents are have the prime responsibility and joy. Sometimes the joy is not there of raising kids, but the responsibility and joy of raising kids. And they should be empowered to make those decisions which are appropriate for their children.
Finally, just one brief question I'll go to Tim with, actually, because Scott Glue, who's on the call, has noticed that Family Zone has an app on the App Store, but asks what restrictions are in place from Google, from Apple, sorry, or to put it another way, how could you make that app better, Tim, if you had all the access you wanted to Apple technology?
Oh, in so many ways. I mean, the first one is kids can remove our app. We try to make it difficult, but ultimately they have the ability to remove our app. In the enterprise space, you know, when we're getting that app pushed by a business onto that device, the user, the adult in that circumstance, or the student can't remove it. But there's a lot more than that. Businesses can do this, which parents can't. Limit access to iMessage. Jordan spoke about kids being up at night, messaging each other. You know, iMessage isn't blocked. iMessage isn't blockable by parental control apps, which means kids sit there under their doona chatting with each other, looking at those red receipts and notifications flying around. It's a big problem. Businesses can limit the use of hotspotting. You know, kids can very easily hotspot to other devices and bypass any filtering technology put on their devices. Businesses can limit access to VPN services. Businesses can limit access to explicit iTunes content. You name it. There would be, if there's 100 features that a parental control app can use, there would be 300 features that enterprise safety apps can use. It is quite remarkable, the difference.
Well, thank you for joining us for the launch of the Menzies Research Centre's report, Empowering Australian Parents to Keep Their Children Safe Online. And thank you for our contributors today, Celia Hammond, Jordan Foster and Tim Levy. That's it for the Menzies Research Centre. You can find out more about us by going to our website, www.menziesrc.org, where you can also download this report. And you can also find out about becoming a subscriber to the Menzies Research Centre or donating if you want to support our work. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, and goodbye from all of us.